All right, welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you here today for our sixth dialogue series with the Touchstones of Hope for Children, Youth, and Families, Reconciliation in Child Welfare. So this series is on culture and language today, and we're really lucky to have with us some amazing panelists. So please go ahead and engage with us in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from. We have several people already on the call and more that are registered. So we will just kind of ease into this morning, and I will pass it off to our wonderful moderator, Jocelyn.
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're on the West Coast. Wache Miswe, Shwebanish, Nishinakasun, Muskrini Toshin. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, hosting this dialogue series. If you see a few familiar faces and names in the chat, and it's so great to see everybody on this truly, I like to call it an international event. We've got many people from many different nations across the United States and Canada. I don't know if we have anybody from across oceans or anything like that, but if you are, welcome. So as mentioned, this is the next in a series of dialogues. So we've had conversations on the Touchstones of Hope, which have included non-discrimination, self-determination, holistic approach, and this is the culture and language. If you're not already aware, the final one will be in November regarding structural interventions, when I get to take a bit of a back seat and, well, a different seat, I guess, and not be your moderator, but actually present with you. I'm so happy for the panelists today. We've got a really great lineup of speakers. We've got Don Coyhis from the Mohican Nation, president and founder of White Bison, Gabrielle Fayant-Lewis, Métis, who's the co-founder of the Assembly of Seven Generations, and Rose Dominic from Urutsaarmiut. I said my guttural, the language there, it's not quite well developed, but did my best, from the Native Council, and she's a leader in culturally relevant healthcare, formerly the director of preventive services at Yukon Kuskokwim Health Corporation. So I'm going to talk as little as possible, and I would like to hand it over to the speaker so that you can hear from them, because they have amazing perspectives and stories and experiences to share on this. Without further ado, Don, please go ahead.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to say I'm just really honored to be here as a part of this series. I always love these series because they really get a lot of dialogue going, in our communities, and also when we hear how other people are doing things, we share that information. It all helps us all come to terms with where we're at, and a lot of good ideas where we're doing, and sometimes responds in partnerships and working together on certain things. So it's just really an honor for us to be here this morning to share about the Albrighty movement and the culture and the healing part of it. White Bison is about 34 years old. That's how long ago that we started involved in this. And what we found was probably one of the smartest things we did is we formed a council of elders. And so we had elders from various, we try to get them from the woodlands, from the plains, from Alaska, from different places that would help us. We really didn't know a lot what we were doing when we started. And it wasn't until we started to talk to the elders that we found out some things. So one of the things that's important is to know how I see it is a long time ago, where we all got our culture from. I believe there's like 570 some tribes, but wherever we lived on the earth, that is where the earth taught us what we were to do. We observed the animals, the birds, the seasons. We learned about spirituality. There's a spiritual world, and some of our people, they knew how to go into that spiritual world and get answers and come back out. And eventually, I think that we called that was our culture, and each tribe has its own culture. And I think that's a little bit different than a dominant culture. When they use the word culture, they use it when everybody is doing it, then they say, well, that's a culture. So you have drug culture, you have different cultures, but I think when we refer to that, we're talking about our traditional teachings. We're talking about what the ancestors taught us and what's been handed down from a generation to generation. So that would be the reference that I will use when I talk about, about the culture. So those teachings that they handed down were things like the cycle of life. There was baby, youth, adult, elder. That was the cycle of life. And so spring, summer, fall, winter, that was the seasons. And we learned that that was a creator's way of synchronizing things up so we knew where we were in relationship to the design of the universe and design of the earth and all those things. And so each of the communities, at least that we have gone to, they always talk about, the old people talk about this is the way it was. They talk about where they got the information from. Then for us, something happened that changed that. Changed number one, and that was when the Europeans came here to this country, and they wanted to expand and take things over. Then we become a problem because we were in the way on where we were and the things that we were doing. And so they had a thing called a manifest destiny, and that was just a thing that they believed that God told them that they owned everything and we weren't humans and that they could take whatever they wanted to, and they were acting on the behalf of God, is what I understand. And then they had to have a strategy on how to get rid of us, how they could change us. I actually have a documentation of a hearing that took place in Washington, and the hearing was about, should we exterminate the Indian or should we integrate the Indian? And that was actually a hearing that took place, and it was more cost effective to integrate us into the dominant culture. And I took that document I found to a historian, and I said, is this really true? I mean, this is what they were talking about in Washington? Yeah, it was. So one of the strategies that really caused a change in us was the boarding school. And what that strategy was is in order to see, we was very powerful because we knew about the physical world, we knew about the spiritual world, we had ceremonies, we were very, very knowledgeable about many, many things. And so it was hard to reckon with us. So they had to have a strategy on how do we take them over. What they decided to do was, if they could take the children and re-educate the children to teach them what they wanted to teach them, then they would grow up to be human beings that would be a part of the dominant culture. And so the government created a system of boarding schools, and it wasn't just here, but also in Canada. But they created a system of boarding schools, and they took thousands and thousands of the children away and put them in these boarding schools. And then instead of teaching them what we would be teaching them, they took away what we were teaching them and said, no, this is what we'll teach them instead. And so as a part of that process, as we know, I'm not saying every boarding school is like this, but the reports that we get back, when the kids spoke their language, they were punished. There were many things that went on. Sexual abuse went on in these schools. Just many, many things happened over a period of time, so that when these kids grew up, and the ones that made it through the boarding school, then they came back home, and they didn't know the language. They didn't know what all these things were. And this is the first appearance we started to have of alcoholism and of abuses and of sexual abuse. So then the quick view is by 1920, 99% of the native population here had been wiped out. All the native people that you see here now are the birth out of 1% of people that survived what actually was a genocide. United Nations has 6 definitions of genocide, and we fit all of these definitions of what genocide is determined as. So that went on, and it went on until about 1960s is when AIM was born, and AIM took over some schools and they started to do things, taking a stand on things. And what AIM wasn't perfect, but man, they woke us up. I think since that time, we quit walking with our heads down and we said, I am proud to be Indian. I'm proud to be Native. Our heads came up and we were not looking bad anymore, at ourselves. And so that started to happen. And then by 1960, the boarding school era started to stop. It wasn't completely over, but it went on that long, clear through the 1960s. And then we started to see some hints of some kind of healing started to take place. And I mention this because if we did not have those people in the 60s and 70s and 30s or whatever do what they did, our Albrighty movement wouldn't be here today. There were people before us that started this healing process. Then they handed it on to us, just like someday we'll hand it on to you guys. And you young ones, you're going to be running with it and taking it on to the next level that it's supposed to be. So one of the first ones that came by was an organization called NANACOA, the Native American Adult Children of Alcoholics. They started talking about sexual abuse right in open meetings. They started talking about violence. No one could believe that this darn group was right in a hotel and in those rooms talking very openly about what the heck was going on with us. And this is where you first started to see, we openly started to do things like smudging. Because as many of us know, the government passed a law that it was illegal for us to do ceremonial things. You get put in jail for it. And so we did them secretly, but we didn't let people know that they're going on until 1978. They passed the Indian Religious and Freedom Act, where we started to find out we could do ceremonies and things out in the open. But NANACOA was actually the ones that you'd go there, and we didn't know about smudging. We didn't know about the medicines, and some of the radical people some of them were part of AIM and some were just elders that knew things, but they started teaching us that we could do these things. This is the way it was, you see, in the old days. Then that was about in the 70s, and then in 1988, White Bison was born. It's just so like one thing was handed on to the next generation to take it on. And last August 10th, I celebrated 43 years of sobriety. And so, but at that time it started, I wasn't sober that long. And who would ever think God would use drunks to be heading up a healing movement? But later on, I found out that there was no angels involved in it anyway. They all just did stuff that I did and acted like how I acted and was trying to pull their families back together like I was trying to do. And, so just the movement started among ourselves. That was NANACOA. And then some spiritual things started to happen. 1994, the Hoop of 100 Eagle Feathers was born. And shortly after that was born, we were instructed by our council elders to make 4 journeys across the United States. One of them, we ran from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. We ran 4,294 miles in 109 days, stopping into communities, talked about recovery, talked about healing, that a healing time was here, talked about prophecies. I think our first gathering, there was about 27 people there. In the last gathering that we did on that journey, I think there was over 1,000 people started to wake up. So something was going on in our communities. We were waking up, or something was really cool. We were showing up, and we were passing rumors and stuff back and forth and showing up and gassing up our res cars and showing up, for ceremonial things and all the things like that. So for us, by 1998, that Hoop was born, and this is when the journey started to take place. So this was like the birth of the Albrighty movement. And so I thought I'd just give like a very quick history of how it got here. It was actually, there were people before us, the ancestors before us, that worked through really tough times, and nobody cared about Indian alcoholism or drug abuse. No one cared about that. But these few people of our ancestors that got sober, and they started to make roads into, into the healing movement. And so by the time the Albrighty movement got going, we started to find out from our council of elders and others that there was something about when we added culture to what we were doing, incredible things started to happen. And we found out eventually, I would say there's this formula that 1 ounce of culture would create 10 pounds of healing. It wasn't like a 1 for 1. If you just, I don't care how screwed up your life was, if you just started smudging and praying in the morning, your life changed tremendously. Just that one thing. But then what started to happen, sun dances were starting to be born, and sweat lodges were showing up, and there was this whole movement thing was starting to, to go on. And so what we ended up doing is, it wasn't until about maybe 12 years ago is when Dr. Maria Braveheart and Edward Duran and some of those elders that had the education, they started to teach us about this connectedness between intergenerational trauma and our current social issues. We did not know about that before. I always used to wonder when we first got into this work is, how come we could not stop the drinking? It just seemed no matter what you did, it kept on going. But what we learned was we weren't working on the cause, we were working on the symptom, because the government grants and all those things, they were giving us proven ways. If you just do this, this would help with the drinking, but it didn't work for us. What we found out, we had to get down to causes and conditions. We had to, if you take a look at a forest and you saw the behavior of the trees, we had to go underground to see what was feeding at the root level. And we didn't know that until the elders. What we found out at the root level is where the intergenerational trauma was. A lot of it perpetrated by the boarding schools. And I myself, I do not know a Native person is not touched one way or another by that boarding school. And what we learned about 8, 10, 12 years ago is that trauma that many of our ancestors experienced is recorded in the level of the DNA. And then that is passed down from generation to generation. So you can see later on behavioral issues that are interconnected. So we're carrying this around. If our ancestors did not heal, then we're carrying around. And I used to wonder when I got into recovery, there's a thing called inventory. I would put in there my resentment inventory, the stories that my grandpa told me, what happened when our people moved from upstate New York to Wisconsin. And the person that I would be doing that step with, they would say, why are you putting that in your inventory? That was then, now is now. You wasn't even there. But not until I worked with a Native person that was in recovery did I learn. My generation, my grandpa and grandmas was attending that boarding school, and I was carrying around that hurt of what they did not heal from. We didn't know that. And once we started to know that, things started to really change. And so over a period of time, we started to, we would get a teaching like the elders, they would say, this is the natural order. Individual, then the family heals, then the community heals, and then the nation heals. So what we did was we had to find out, even though the government was saying community development and all that stuff, we found out we had to develop programs that just showed people, how do you change yourself? And as we started to do that, we started to hear, people would say your teachings are not there, but they're here. And so what we found out was inside of a salmon is the innate knowledge of what a salmon is supposed to do. It don't need to go to salmon school. It knows everything that it's supposed to do, going out, hanging out for 4 years, coming back, swimming up the river, it knows that. So inside of every human being is this knowledge of who is supposed to be, including us. So inside of ourselves is the innate knowledge. Every human being has an innate knowledge of your own well-being. And for us, what that knowledge is the culture. when you hear the drum for the first time, maybe you'll cry. There's just something wakes up when you touch the culture. It's hard to deny, you see that it goes. So we started to develop programs for children, daughters of traditions, sons of traditions. We made celebrating family programs. We made fatherhood. We made motherhood. We started putting cultural programs in prisons and reentry programs. And just over a period of time, we just kept on developing, along with the elders' guidance, this cultural-based programs. And I remember when I got sober, you were lucky if you could find an Indian who was sober a year or two and run into him. If you got one, you wanted to take your picture with him, you could just, God, here's a bro, that's sober. I wanted to. Nowadays, there's thousands of us sober, not dozens. There's thousands of us sober. So there's a number of organizations. We all kind of woke up. I mean, look at NICWA, how it was. Now look at it, it's not like how it was before. There's a number of people have woken up, and I know we have like elders like Rose, is passing on the knowledge and the information. And I just hope someday we'll have a program where you could just talk all day, that you could just put that knowledge out there because it's valuable. The ones that know it, there's not a lot of people that know, those things that still have it to pass it on. So when we started, I'll kind of close with this. When we started, we were just dealing with alcohol. All of our programs are alcohol. You blink your eye and you look now, it's alcohol and it's meth and it's prescription drugs and it's missing and murdered women and suicides, and it's more complicated than it used to be. But there's thousands of us sober now doing this work. It's not like you're finding just people are 1 year sober doing this work. There's thousands of us are now engaged, in this work, even though it seems to have been more complicated. And so we were instructed, I'll just kind of close with this, but last 2 years ago, we have a council of elders and we meet with them every year. And 2 years ago, they told me, they said, you need to find your replacement. And I was just telling them all the good things that we had done. And I says, well, why? And they said, well, you're getting old. That's how come. We all know that's how you got to hand over to the next generation, And so not only that, they told me, they said, when you turn it over to somebody, it needs to be turned over to a woman. They said, because the way things are, we're out of balance in male thought. It isn't about diversity or none of that. It's about, a long time ago, many of our communities were matriarchal. They were the clan mothers and things that guided things. And they said, you got to come back to that. And so we put a woman in charge of the movement. And I'm now just the chairman of the board, just kind of keeping things together, at that level. So now what we, instead of having just conferences around alcohol, we have it around, we have all addictions conference. We come to a conference, we have AA speakers, NA speakers, Al-Anon speakers, gamblers, Sex Anonymous. We have many, many speakers and workshops on all of this type of healing, that we're taking place. So to me, even though it's different, I think that's why I like these series, that you guys are putting on, because it allows to see what we're all doing in these various different ways, of explaining that. So the Albrighty movement is, it has a life of its own. We don't own it. We don't stop it. I think when we were, I'll close this last statement, when we were 15 years old, we were trying to control it. And the council of elders, we were telling them how frustrated we were. And they said, don't control it, be a service to it. Just find out what does it need. And then, so we did that. So we quit controlling and quit having people fill out forms and all that kind of stuff. And so it has a life of its own. So I guess as the civil rights movement is kind of known for Blacks, even though it's for everybody, this Albrighty movement, this is ours. But all the other colors, are welcome, red, yellow, black, and white. But it's a movement, and now you guys are running it. You're doing things with it that we just had our conference in Colorado Springs last week, and I found out you guys are doing stuff with this thing is just way beyond things that that I could think of. So I want to thank you for allowing me this little bit sharing of the Albrighty movement, and how we use the culture. The culture is prevention. 1 ounce of culture gives us 10 pounds of healing. We need to get our own approval process on grants. We got to quit going to the white people back in Washington to tell us that our culture is valid or not. We need to change that process, that we go to our elders who have doctorate degrees, etc., and get them to just tell us. We don't have to make it a theory or hypothesis. We can just use it because they've been using it for thousands of years. And I can't wait to hear you, Rose, to see what this series is producing. So thank you very much.
Chimigwech, Don. It's really great to hear from you about all the great work that you've done and continue to do in communities. And so for those who are just joining us or missed the beginning, my name's Jocelyn Formsma. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Friendship Centers, and I'm also a board member for the National Indian Child Welfare Association. Back in 2005, I was one of the facilitators and participants of the Touchstones of Hope gathering, and was one of the co-authors on the Touchstones of Hope document. And it's hard to believe that it's been that long in 2005. I think at the 10-year mark after that gathering, we had a follow-up conversation with the original authors about what's changed and what's different. And what we found by and large is that over time that the Touchstones of Hope have really withstood the time that we've had, and we believe that that's a strength to the communities from which we gathered and shared that information and that knowledge. But really what we were trying to do is just, we looked at the landscape and knew that things could be better, that things could be different. And we needed some kind of framework, a guideline, some kind of a map that gave us a start on that. And that's really where the Touchstones of Hope came from. And there's more information on the NICWA site when you go and look up the Touchstones of Hope dialogue. Of course, a lot of not just information, but resources and things that you can access with the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society website regarding the Touchstones of Hope. And each one of the dialogues that we've had in this dialogue series speak to each one of those touchstones that were outlined in that document. Because if you're not guiding your work and measuring your work by these touchstones, it can be really easy to kind of fall off that pathway. Certainly culture it is such a core component to all of that work, and I think Dawn's talk was really quite poignant in demonstrating how culture really permeates everything, right? So thank you so much for that, Dawn. I really like that an ounce of culture analogy. I think that's very, very important. I next want to introduce Gabrielle and have her share her perspective. Gabrielle's been doing amazing work. We actually live in the same city, and I get to see a lot of her work up close, and it's so great to have her today to speak to the work that Assembly of Seven Generations is doing. So I'll hand it over to you, Gabrielle.
Cool. Thanks, Jocelyn. Yeah, thanks so much, Dawn. I never met you and I don't know you, but that work that you've done and that movement has definitely affected me in a really good way. So I'm actually going on to my 9th year of sobriety. Uh, yeah, and it's 100% like very similar. Um, it was like definitely rooted in ceremony and culture you know, without like the drum and those sweat lodges and all those prayers, like I wouldn't have been able to do it. And so it's really cool. Also, like a lot of the youth I work with, they're now also, you know, trying to leave some of those maybe not so great coping mechanisms behind. And it's always a struggle because some of those coping mechanisms like alcohol or weed are really easy. Like they're just so accessible these days too. So it can be really challenging to be sober. But we also support folks, you know, if they choose not to be sober, wherever they're at in their journey, we're there for them. But I guess like I'll start by just talking about kind of that AIM movement. It still impacted us, like even generations after. And so during like kind of like I guess my generation's real like AIM movement or that spark that was lit was really during Idle No More. Especially for me, it was like a this really powerful winter in 2012. So 10 years ago now. And if it I don't know more, it really sparked a lot of fires that are still burning. And it was definitely that moment like Don was talking about where, you know, there was so many Indigenous folks here in Ottawa and just sharing history that we were never taught in school. And also when you're away from your homelands, that history is even reduced more. And when you're away from your family, um, it's just so hard to really understand your own history and your own people's history, unfortunately. So I don't know more was that time for me where I was like, wow, oh my God, this is yeah, this feels so right. And that's kind of how we started A7G. So Assembly of Seven Generations, A7G. We really just started as an idea, as a vision, as a need. And the need was that there wasn't a strong enough platform that was really speaking to or with with Indigenous youth. There was always a lot of calls for Indigenous youth to bring their bodies to different movements and, you know, different blockades and actions. But what the microphone was never actually passed to a lot of youth. And so when that happens, the youth aren't able to share what's going on in their lives or share the needs that they have. And so that's really why we created A7G to create a platform for Indigenous youth. There's so many youth programs that exist, but youth are actually not involved in creating most of these programs. And Indigenous people aren't involved in creating a lot of Indigenous programming either. Um, so that's really what we wanted to work on. And so we kind of established ourselves as A7G in 2014. And, you know, we didn't have any money. We were just all young people. We didn't know what we were doing. But we knew that we had to do something. We knew that we wanted to do something and create something that really like really brought folks back to ceremony and traditional forms of governance and just created safety, like a safe place for folks to go. And it was really discouraging for a number of years. You know, we had a lot of doors that were closed in our faces. I've been like kind of outcasted and blacklisted from a lot of places because I'm so vocal and honest. Most tables that are directly connected to funding and creating policy and programs, they don't like to hear the truth. You know, they really like to just keep doing things the way that they're doing it. And, you know, people have created jobs around the genocide and violence of Indigenous young people. You know, child welfare is a huge business. Um, and yeah, so it's really hard. It's really hard to create this space for Indigenous youth. But we just kept on going, and we had a lot of support from elders and knowledge keepers, and we had so many prayers behind us, and it was really more than just a few folks coming together to create something. It was really like a movement in a lot of ways. And so in 2018, we were kind of discouraged after those first 4 years. We'd applied for funding and not gotten it, and we were just kind of just stuck. And there was a drop in for folks that were on the streets, and it shut down due to policy changes from people that didn't understand the impacts of their policy changes. And we experienced several deaths in the community. People just didn't have a space anymore. There was a few overdoses and things like that, and some of them were young people, and really devastating stories. um, and so we carried that, and we just felt so discouraged. But we went to this conference, and we met this other group of young people from Winnipeg, and they actually dismantled now. They're doing other things, those young people, but they told us that they just met every Friday night in Winnipeg. And so we're like, what? Why don't we do that? And so, like, that's literally all it was. It was just a few of us. We came back to Ottawa, and we're like, you know what? We're just gonna meet every Friday night, and we're gonna have some pizza, some Chinese food, whatever kind of food. We're gonna play some card games. We're just gonna chill. We're just gonna hang out with each other. And then from there, it just kept getting bigger and bigger. And then there was sharing circles, and then there was sharing drum songs, and then there was people that would come by and share teachings with us. And we still always had food, though. Food to me is ceremony. And of course, like, I love feast food the most, but any food just makes you feel so good. um and sometimes, like, young people will come by, and they don't say anything at first. They just sit there, and it takes a couple months, but we don't judge them. We don't try to pressure them to speak or be loud or anything. And then they start to build that trust with us, and then they just open up. And sometimes when they first open up, it's really hard. It's like all this trauma comes out, but we're there. We support those young people. We do a lot of peer-to-peer support. And so we take care of each other as a community. And those Friday nights, they kind of turned into almost like a council meeting. And we've never missed the Friday night since March 2018. Even during the pandemic, we went online, and we still held that space. One time there was like a tornado that happened in Ottawa, and we're still together. And it's just created this real, like, much more of a family vibe than a lot of nonprofits are able to create. And so even though we're a registered nonprofit, we do things very differently. um, so we have no core funding. I have no salary. No one at A7G has a salary to do this type of work. And that's for a reason. A lot of funding that comes with that type of money comes with strings attached. And a lot of it is about employment. A lot of it is continuing this assimilation process. And so we are very choosy about where we take money. And the beautiful thing about not taking that kind of money is that we're able to do a lot of cool things. We're able to actually do the things that young people want to do, not what a government is telling Indigenous youth what they should be doing. Um, so that's like a little bit about our story, how we kind of got to where we are. And I'll share some of our website too, just to, like, give you some little visuals to understand a little bit more. So Where's the website? Here we go. So even just last night, or sorry, just yesterday and last night, we were out on the land, and we were working on those moose hides, and we're getting our hands dirty and moving, and really appreciating that moose and that the life that it gave for us. And we had this really beautiful feast ceremony, and then we also celebrated the full moon that just happened. And it seems so small, and sometimes you never see the impact that you're making until years later. But one thing that a lot of youth that are suffering from addictions often tell me is that they'll say, I want to come to this moose hide you're working on, and I'll tell them, okay, but are you able to maybe like not smoke weed for this one day or a few hours? And we'll have a really honest conversation about it. And they'll say, yeah, actually, I'm okay if I don't smoke weed for a few hours as long as I keep my hands busy. And I'm like, perfect. That's what working on moose hides is all about, just being busy and keeping your hands busy. And yeah, and then that young person has has decided to stop smoking weed altogether. And it doesn't happen overnight, and you can't force people to do anything. But when it happens like that, you know that you're doing something right. And that young person, I'm really happy about where they're at. And it's hard getting through those things. But A7G, we do quite a few reports as well. We do quite a bit of research. We've defined our own research ethics. Those research ethics have been told to us by Indigenous youth. And so that's like in a whole report. And so we use those research ethics in everything we do. But this is really what A7G is in a really quick way. It's really this tree, this beautiful tree. And we're rooted in the land and our ancestors, our cultures, our kin. And from that Friday night, that's that council that creates all of these beautiful additional activities. So, for example, one youth that came to Friday night, they just told us, "Hey, I want to learn my papa's language, Anishinaabe. And so we're like, cool, let's do it." And that's like how simple it is. It doesn't have to be like a big process or anything. And for about 2 years, we did Anishinaabe one drop-in with their papa. And it was a really great way to try to reclaim those languages that have been stolen. We also do a lot of special events and a lot of land-based programming. Just last weekend, we were harvesting corn from Six Nations and learning how traditional corn is harvested, and how even harvesting that corn is a ceremony. So all of these things, you put good intentions into them, and they feed you back. They feed you back in a really good way. So I guess like I'll just share some of our little resources and what we do. This is like literally this is how it all started. It was just this post. And folks came out, and we've been going ever since. Um, it's really hard work though. And I think a lot of time people see us on social media and different places, and we make it look really easy. We make it look fun, and it is a lot of fun, but it's also a lot of hard work. And it's really about treating young people like they're your nephews and nieces and family, as opposed to a client. And so that means that, yeah, sometimes you're going to be up until 2 in the morning because someone's having a mental health crisis, and you really care about that person's life. And then that person ends up becoming a helper who's then helping other young people that are going through crisis. But that's really A7G. I feel like there's so much more I could talk about with A7G and how we do things, but I think I'll leave it at that for now. And I'm just really grateful to be here. Really looking forward to hearing from Rose also. Miigwech, hi hi.
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. And like I said, you know, being in Ottawa at the same city as Gabrielle, I get to see the work up close, and we're really fortunate that this group of young people came together to provide supports for each other. I think it's just a really good example of what is possible when we just have those supports in place. And I hope you don't mind, like one of my big things has always been around youth engagement and representation. I started out as a youth rep within National Indian Child Welfare Association, as well as with friendship centers, you know, almost 20 years ago. And that was a lot of the work that we did. We just started hosting dances for our friends in the community, and that grew and grew into something else and set me on the course for where I am today. I, since starting in my position, have really advocated hugely for youth multi-purpose funding that is flexible and that is responsive to youth, and that is youth led. Because like Gabrielle said, a lot of it sometimes ends up becoming very institutional, or it becomes like you can only come to this youth program if, you know, you're here to get a job, you're here to volunteer, you're here, you know, that these organizations and these people are taking something or drawing something from young people, as opposed to creating a safe space where they can take off their cloak, they can take off the armor that they carry every single day as young people, and just be among each other. So I'm so happy that organizations like A7G exist, and hopefully it sparks some ideas for you on what's possible in your own communities. And for NAFC, we've actually just engaged A7G as well, to do some work. We call it research, but basically it's we provide the resource to A7G and other organizations, and all we're asking is a simple questions. Tell us what you wish that employers knew about your experience in employment, and you know, in a way that we can help try to reduce some of those barriers, right? And there are no restrictions, except we just need that answer somehow, and it could be in a visual art piece, it could be music, it could be if they really want to do like a in-depth research, you know, 25-page research report, that's fine too. We suspect that we might get something a little bit more creative than that. So I think just my message out of that experience is just, if you are aware of a group of young people in your community that have ideas and want to be doing things, it doesn't have to cost a whole lot, but I mean, you can invest in those young people in their capacity. Even $5,000 or $10,000 goes a long way. Even $1,000 goes a long way for them to be able to do their programming. And I just want to reiterate again just how important that piece has always been to my heart, and the things that I try to do and kind of living up to what I used to tell other people when I was young, at least when I was a youth rep. So thank you so much, Gabrielle, for sharing that. And, you know, I really encourage everybody to look at their website and follow their social media posts so you can see the other kinds of examples of the things that they're doing. I was also recently, I was able to go back home to my own home community to participate in ceremony. Not everybody gets that opportunity, and I recognize my privilege in that, but I was able to do it. And I was blown away by the number of young people that were there, and in particular, young men who had shared with me some of their experiences, which, you know, it's not my story to share here, but I just really appreciated their openness, and that cultural connection piece cannot be understated by how and why they came to that ceremony, and watching them work their butts off from morning until night for that camp and for that culture, just to have a connection with each other, to their their roots as who they were as Moose Cree, was just, it was incredible to see, and it just reinforced that belief in me when it comes to mental health, when it comes to healing, support, advancement, anything that we're doing in our communities, that the culture piece has to be such a huge component to that. It's what sets anything else apart from anything else anybody's doing. We could go other places to get counseling and to have a phone number to call and talk to somebody, but that cultural piece really really speaks to people. So thank you again, Gabrielle. And I would like to introduce our final speaker, Rose, if you would like to take the stage for our final piece.
Let me get my slides up as I get started here. Okay, let me do it this way. Okay, good morning. My Yuchtun name is Nuyailnguk. I was born and raised in St. Mary's. It's on the lower Yukon River, about 80 miles northwest from where I live out here in Bethel, Alaska. And I'm about 50 miles inland from the Bering Sea coast. I'm really honored to be here and to be learning along with everybody else. I'm very honored to be in this circle. I'm honored to share a little bit of some of the wisdom and some of the work that we have been doing out here in Western Alaska. I am about a couple of months shy of having been the director of preventative services at YKHC, our tribal health organization. And I was the director since inception. And the department was charged with establishing culturally focused programs to address suicide, substance abuse, and many of the behavioral health issues that we face in a lot of our Native communities. So we service 56 tribal communities in the region that is about the size of the state of Oregon. And I left my position there because I needed to expand in places where this was naturally moving toward, way beyond health and wellness in a health organization. So, and I really, really appreciate many of the elders who already knew what needed to be done, why we were the way we are, and help guide to bring our programs to where we are at now. So one of the first things I would like for us to do is to look at some important information, that piece of wisdom that helped to really guide the work that we do. And these are like foundational thoughts that have brought us to this point. And this is one of the important pieces of wisdom. So our ancestors really understood that every human being was born with these gifts that ensured our destiny to live this path, this way of the human being. And the system was put together to ensure, with everything in our culture set up to ensure that we were able to walk this path. And part of that assurance was to make sure that every person was taught and the way of the human being, to make sure that we live this path. But you know, there's a lot of adversity, and when a person experiences trauma, they're suddenly jolted out of that path into a path that will eventually lead to death, illness, and the like. And then it's understood that we have to process that experience. And a person who has been taught from the beginning how to live well will be able to return to this path with healing. And then a person who has not learned how to live well requires not only teaching and learning, but also healing, so that we can return to this path. So I was a person who was somewhere in the middle of those two, having been colonized, having carried the impacts of historical trauma and experiencing lifetime trauma and the like. I was a person who was on that darker path. I also needed to learn. So this is how our ancestors viewed what health and balance meant. And this whole understanding has really helped us to put together programs and activities for our region. So when you look at that and understand that worldview, there's a very specific path that really needs to be on a journey in. And the first thing is to be able to understand where that harm, that adversity, trauma had redirected you on your path. That's the first important wisdom coming from our ancestors. The second step is to ensure that you become aware of how that experience changed you. Because when you experience trauma, adversity of some kind, it changes who you are. It changes your mind. It changes your heart. It changes your spirit. And if you do not understand how that has changed you, then you're going to remain on this path that will lead to illness and death. And once you understand, once you realize, then it helps to motivate you to begin the process of healing. And then that can lead you into restoring balance. So there's a very specific path, that process in this path of in this journey that we must embark on. So when we look at step one, where did it all of this start from? And in so many of our cases, collectively as Indigenous people, the impact of colonization is where all of this starts. And it contributes to so much of our issues in our communities. The impact of colonization. We understand that so much of this addiction, suicide, substance abuse, domestic violence, school dropout, so many of these things is response to both lifetime and historical trauma. We begin to understand that, you know, it's not a pathological response that prevents us from learning how to live in the world that was forced upon us. But we start to understand that there's a perfectly good reason why we are the way we are. So once we begin to understand this, then we begin to take a look at how that experience affected you, how it changed your mind, how it affected your heart and changed it, how it affected your spirit and changed it. And so we focus on pieces of wisdom that helps us to understand the nature of a human being and how it responds to the environment. And then we begin the process of healing. And this is probably the most important component of our programs and activities. The medicine to entice people to begin working on this healing path. And our ancestors didn't have licensed, credentialed clinicians. They didn't have schools and treatment centers and the like. They had wisdom that was gifted to them, to us, that was utilized, I am told, by our elders since the beginning of time. And the biggest part of our medicine was unconditional love. And it included empathy, compassion, generosity, patience, no judgment. An application of that medicine is what entices a person to begin doing all of that work. So that's the second step and the third step. And once healing begins to take place, once you start to embark on that journey, then the next thing that we need to do is to start fostering this connection to individuals who are embarking on this journey. And because of the process of colonization, we have come to really devalue our culture and all that it has to offer to maintain wellness and balance. So we start to foster this connection to our own identity, because it's in our identity that is going to move us away from all of that history. So, and when you look at the whole process, this is what it looks like. And so the first stage is to look at where everything's how everything in our history impacted us. The second step is to really work on accepting and starting the process of redefining that history. And the third stage is to practice, continue that work. And then finally, we start to move to where we have that capacity to heal and to work with and to support each other. And we start to build this in our own communities, in our own families. So we like to use a lot of our Indigenous words around this work, because you know, our Indigenous languages are all about connection. They're not adversarial. They're not accusatory, or they're not generally to bring disconnection and divide. They're not divisive. So we try to use and so the first thing is to really understand. We need to be able to understand the whole process. We need to understand how our whole being responds to our environment, why we are the way we are, what happened to us. And then we need to internalize it. And then the final part of it is for us to take action. And we are motivated to do that when we're able to understand. So how we implement all of this, we do Jalgajaka gatherings, trainings, in all of our tribal communities. We provide it for our healthcare providers, our service providers, any other organization requests. And then we also provide treatment and therapy utilizing all of what I just explained. We've been doing a lot of work to integrate all of this into our healthcare organization, our educational institutions, the tribes that serve each of their tribal communities, and individuals and organizations who provide services to our people. And we want all of these systems to understand and incorporate this. They are our partners. They are part of the circle who are here to help us to save lives. So when we can help everyone to really understand this approach, understand the wisdom behind all of the ways in which our Indigenous ways are established, then it helps them incorporate this wisdom in the work that they do, because individuals will only do what they have learned how to do, what they are taught to do. And so we want them to understand and know all of this. And no matter who you are, where you come from, you know exactly what we're sharing. You know exactly, you can understand this wisdom, because this is an Indigenous approach, and it's a very basic human approach. And you and I, no matter where we come from, we are both human beings. We have the need for love and connection. We have the need for and the desire for balance and health. And we all work toward that. We just have a different path in getting to the same goal. So no matter who our providers are, where they come from, what language or culture they come from, they understand exactly what we're talking about and what we're bringing out. And then, so we've been engaging in in a lot of research and evaluation. We want to see how this is impacting what we've been doing for the last 10 years, how this is impacting everyone that we serve. So our researcher, who's been doing a lot of the evaluation research, I just thought it was important to put his quote there. And then I would like to share a little bit of some of the highlights of our evaluation. So we're focusing on a lot of these questions. We want to see how people are taking what they learned and putting this into practice. And our elders have taught us that when we can see results in some of these areas, improvements in these areas, that's our native way of knowing. So we want to make sure that this is a very Indigenous approach to evaluation and looking at outcomes of the research we have been doing. And I thought it was just, it would be good for me to add a little bit of the feedback. So because we're doing this training for our community, for our youth, for our elders, for organizations, service providers, it's helping us to utilize our Indigenous language and our culture to change systems. And we understand that laws and policies may or may not change. They're the most difficult things for us to change. But when we can define and guide some of our ancestral ways and help change perspective, it's the next best thing we can do to change people who are working in these institutions, changing the way they're providing services. The individuals and families in our communities. When we take that approach, we know that we are beginning to make changes in our systems. So all of this is done to blend our two worlds and our approaches so that members of our community, so that me, my children, my grandchildren, my siblings, and my family can live a better life and move away from the impacts of historical trauma. So I want to thank all of you for your respectful attention and giving me the opportunity to share just a little tiny bit about what we do. Guyana.
Thank you so much, Rose. Amazing. I mean, you can see the depth of knowledge and experience that you have and have worked so long in your communities to do this. Really appreciate you sharing some of that knowledge with us. So I want to thank all of the speakers. We've had a really great panel of folks who have shared a lot about their personal experiences, but also the longevity of experience that they've had in this work. Certainly a huge component of those touchstones of hope. Just a reminder that the Touchstones of Hope in this dialogue series is a partnership between the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. It's based out of Canada, and the National Indian Child Welfare Association that's based out of the United States. And their work complements each other very, very well across borders. And I've worked both for the Caring Society and have been a longtime board member of NICWA. And so it's always been really great to kind of see how similar our efforts have been on all sides of the border. of course, without, there's unique needs in each community, but there's a lot that we can take commonalities from each other, work together. For the Touchstones of Hope, I mean, we've gone through a lot of the values and principles associated with the Touchstones of Hope, but there was also, in thinking about this idea of reconciliation, and we kind of started talking about reconciliation in child welfare before reconciliation was really a buzzword or something that we heard a lot, in particular in Canada. But it was also always supposed to be a process, an ongoing process. In Canada, we've had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission regarding residential schools, and there's a lot of discussion around, well, we can't have reconciliation without truth, but we can't have truth without action. If we're just sharing truth and there's nothing that taken from that truth that moves us forward, then that's also a bit of a folly exercise. And when we drafted the Touchstones of Hope, we actually put a 4-step process as part of reconciliation. So truth telling was always only one part of the reconciliation process. There had to be also steps regarding acknowledging, restoring, and relating. So there has to be a process of acknowledging the truths that we've been hearing. There has to be a process for restoring those things that have been lost, restitution. And then there has to be ongoing relationship relating to one another as we move forward. And for each step in those processes, they were never supposed to be just a final, here we go. That's, once we take the first step, we take all 4. What we've realized is as we've gone through these processes in a lot of different communities and different avenues and the different partners that have come to the table, that process has gone ahead a couple steps, it's gone back a few steps. Sometimes it takes a couple steps forward and goes 3 steps back to where we can't even have the conversations around truth. But I still really believe that those 4 steps in that process are valid, and I think that's something that we can all be pushing forward if we're going to be maintaining and advancing this idea of reconciliation. So just a couple final reminders. So all of the recordings so far and coming in the next session as well, those are available on NICWA's YouTube page. So you can go to NICWA website, you can find our Touchstones of Hope dialogue, but then you can also find the YouTube page there. There's going to be an email coming out to everybody with information and on the next sessions and the past sessions and an evaluation for this one. So please fill that out. And a reminder that the next session will be taking place on November 16th, 2021 from 1 to 2 p.m. 1 to 2:30 p.m. Eastern, so the same time as today, or starting at, I believe that's 10 a.m. Pacific time to 11:30. So thank you all again for joining us. Once again, Chimigwech to all of the speakers for all of your knowledge and experience, and I look forward to seeing you all at the next one. Chimigwech.
So at this time, if we have anyone who has questions for the panelists, feel free to let us know in the chat or go ahead and unmute and let us know, things, what you thought, questions you might have. We'll just wait another minute to see if anyone who's still on the call with us has anything they would like to share.
Ati, sai Wilf Junior Plasway Satni, sai Kalantan and a habitasus stay, Lalatsamasu Habatsakalzek. Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Wilf Plasway Jr. I belong to the Mountain Clan and my father clan is the Grouse. I work for Carriers County Family Services as a receptionist here, and I really appreciate to all the speakers, Don, Rose, and Gabrielle. I thank you so much for sharing everything you have done for this presentation here of this Zoom meeting. It really means a lot, especially for everything that you shared with from your own lives. It means so much to me, especially with the cultural and language. I am so honored to meet all of you, especially with this as myself, that I'm learning my own traditional culture. I regret it from day one, from being a child, because I was so more into video games and I wasn't much into my culture until after my high school years of graduation. I lost my brother and I became into my traditional culture, and that I've now learned more from my mother, who is a hereditary chief from the Lake Bevy Nation of the Mountain Clan. And I really praise you, all three of you, for the speakers, especially Jocelyn, for everything you have by hosting this Zoom meeting. It means a lot. It's been a very to be honest with you, as you could see that I'm wearing all black, I'm actually taking my morning protocols very serious. I just lost two amazing aunties 10 days apart, and it was due to poor health. But I am so glad that I had the opportunity to learn everything and to hear from all three of you. That it just after hearing everything, it just means a lot to me, especially regarding about your hard work of everything. So thank you for sharing this, and I hope that you're all having a safe week, especially with your lives, and I appreciate it. And I apologize, it's not actually a question, but I just wanted to bring that out and share my opinion and thank all three of you for everything you've done. Miss Sai, awaits it.
Thanks, Wilf. Last year's NEFC Youth Forum, Wilf was the star of the TikTok show. So you should look him up on TikTok as well. Thank you for those kind words. I think we have time for maybe one more question or comment if there's one floating out there.
Hi, Jocelyn.
Matthew, hello.
Hi, Natas. Good morning. I have a question for the speakers, and I also, before I share my question, I just want to thank everyone for sharing what you have today. And I am from Cowichan Tribes, and currently we are working with the government of BC and the government of Canada and the coordination agreement, much like COWASIS has completed, and we all seen their agreement signing. For my question with respect to culture and language, in some previous work I did with the First Nations Health Authority here in BC, we worked on the overdose and opioid crisis, helping First Nations communities in BC. And one of the things I learned there about the trauma that has affected us through colonization and residential schools, intergenerational, with addictions and substance use. When we think about culture and language, sometimes there are barriers for people who use substances, and that includes drug and alcohol-free events. So my question is to the speakers is, what have you seen in practice cultural events that are open to people who use substances, because some of the approaches we were taking here is that culture saves lives. So there has been space created for bringing culture to people who are using substances and helping them through their own health journey. So I just wonder if what else is happening out there in Indian country with respect to that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Matthew. So I actually have to jump off for my next meeting at 2:30, but I'm going to hand it over to the NICWA staff to manage the response for the questions. But thank you for that important question. I think that's something very important that folks would like to hear from.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So one of our speakers, Rose, Don, Gabrielle, you're welcome, even if all three of you would like to say something short. Whoever speaks up first, go ahead.
Hey, Matthew. I could share a few kind of best practices that we use with A7G. So that's like something that I hear a lot from folks over the years is, you know, folks that are using like alcohol or drugs, they often feel like they can't go to certain spaces because it's just they just don't feel welcome, right? Because they're using, and a lot of ceremonies have those protocols too. And yeah, so I hear that from a lot of young people. They like really feel like there's not a lot for them, and they often feel like there's a disconnect from using and then to jumping into sobriety. Like there's not really like a transitional place for them. So like one practice that we use is like literally just talking to people, like just having honest conversations, like, hey, like where you at, like what's going on right now, and having that kind of relationship where folks can feel good being honest. And it takes time to build those relationships. We've had some experiences, you know, where people just like stop coming around because they feel ashamed of using. And so we check in with folks a lot, and we always like follow up with folks, like especially if someone seemed like they were really enjoying themselves and then all of a sudden aren't coming around anymore. We really check in with them and just let them know that, you know, no matter what, no matter if what they're using or what's going on in their life, that they're still loved and that we still care about them no matter what. So those, I like, for me it's really just about that personal connection and building that trust where folks will be honest. And you know, not everyone needs to be sober, so it's really about just allowing people to work through that harm reduction and celebrating when they get to a different step in their life. So for example, there might be a young person that's using like fentanyl, and like that's really serious and that's really like a hard drug to get free from, and maybe they're transitioning onto weed, and it's like, okay, that's good, like let's encourage this. This is like a harm reduction and we're getting somewhere, and you're feeling a little bit better because you're using a less harmful type of drug. And then maybe they just stay there, and that's okay. So that's kind of how we approach things, and also just offering a lot of informed decision making. So not telling young people like you have to do this or you have to do this, but it's like, here's what happens when you use these certain drugs or alcohol, or here's like maybe also like, for example, Rose, like that whole breakdown of like your trauma. It's like that's trauma informed decision making, knowing where your trauma comes from and like maybe why you made some not so great decisions and how you can correct it and come back from it. So yeah, hopefully that helps out a little bit.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Well, we are at our time here today, but thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, your great questions and comments. Here you can see both the First Nations Carrying Society and the National Indian Child Welfare Association's social media. Please feel free to follow us and stay tuned there for updates. As mentioned, all of the recordings are on the NICWA YouTube, and we look forward to seeing you at the next session. Take care, everyone.